Hello there, and welcome to another episode of Storytime. This is the series where I take you on audio adventures. We experience and encounter things that we might not expect to encounter and experience every day, but I think that's what makes these stories so special. And with today's episode, we're once again going into the wilderness with 10 backpacking stories, with a bonus story at the end. As always, make sure you sit back, relax, and enjoy. Number 1. To start my story off, this happened a couple of years ago. Me and my best friends had planned a trip to go backpacking after months of preparing. We would be going next month, as we all planned on taking vacation together. Looking back on what happened, it still gets to me any time I think about it. The friends going with me were Maria and Linda. We had been friends for all our college years, and this was something we had planned for a long time. Since we didn't really want to stay out in the woods themselves, we actually checked into a small cabin and made a reservation before we went. For the most part, these woods and surrounding area were pretty much empty. It was still neat to explore regardless. The area where the cabins were located was huge. It was this area that was filled with old buildings and even old parking lots too. With all the trees around, it made it very difficult to see. On the other side of the lodging area was an abandoned building that was supposed to be off limits to everybody. When we arrived at the cabins, we were greeted by who I was guessing was the owner of them. This weekend we would be joined by another family who was staying in the cabin next to us. Anyways, our plan was to go walking out into the woods and see what sorts of beautiful sights we could find. The owner of the cabins did tell us one thing. You can go and check out any area of these woods as you like. Just be careful when you're coming back home, especially if you choose to return later in the evening. Make sure you take this marked trail and avoid taking this shorter route. The longer route is more populated, and it goes into the town nearby, so it's definitely more safer. The shorter route, according to our new friend, was in a rundown area where there really wasn't much light. People have actually gotten lost there. Apparently, somebody even had their things taken while walking there, so she recommended we avoided it. With that information, we're now returning back to the cabin. It's about 9 p.m. right now. We walked a fair amount into the wilderness, so we did have quite the walk back. Because we had taken more time than we thought we would, we decided to go ahead and take that shorter route, even though we were told not to use it. Since it wasn't that late, we were pretty sure it wouldn't be a problem. It would save us so much time if we went that way. We did walk by a few campers, so we thought we were worrying for nothing. The thing is, as we went further on this shorter trail, it went further into the middle of nowhere. Even though we had spent the day out in the woods, there was always bound to be a few people nearby us. At this point, we'd been walking for about 20 minutes, and now we realized there's no one out here whatsoever. Linda and Maria had started saying that they were hearing footsteps, and when I stopped and listened together with them, we heard nothing. My best guess was they were hearing things. Another couple of minutes go by, and I so happen to look behind us. I now notice a group of about 5 people walking behind. They were still a fair distance away, but it was now obvious somebody else was out here with us. Even though they kept the same pace as us, they didn't go faster. That would soon change. In an instant, they started running after us, and so we take off running too. I don't think we've ever run that fast in our life. Finally, with some good luck on our side, we see the cabins up ahead of us. We make our way in and we lock everything up. The other family must have been out because they didn't seem to react to all the noise. Either way, here we are all alone in this cabin, with this group most likely still outside. We didn't take our chances. I picked up the phone and I called the park rangers that were stationed nearby. While doing so, Maria and Linda were telling me that they could see the group slowly approaching. While on the line, we started hearing knocking and even scratching at the doors and windows. In anticipation, Maria and Linda moved some furniture in the front door, just to make sure it was difficult for them, had they been successful in opening the door. Thankfully for us, 2 park rangers were in the area driving around. As soon as we saw the headlights, we see this group take off running into the woods. We thank the park rangers for their help, and they told us that they'll take a look through the woods and try to find them. One of them offered to stay and keep a lookout for us, but we ended up leaving that same night instead. We've never gone back there, and as far as I know, I never did hear anything else on whether or not they were found. Number 2. Hi there, the name's Steven, and I wanted to tell you about my story while backpacking. I love going out with friends and going out exploring, and so last weekend, I went with my brother Brian to go backpacking. We live in the Pacific Northwest, Oregon to be exact, and so there were plenty of mountains and woods to check out. Brian had never gone backpacking or camping before, so I thought this would be the perfect opportunity to spend some time with my brother. I wasn't going to make it difficult on him and have him stay an entire week out there, so we would only be going for the weekend instead. Also, I chose an area that was easy for beginners, so there wasn't too much trouble getting around. The trail starts at the bottom of a lake, then from there it goes up into the nearby mountains. It was actually popular with people. I was surprised there had been so many people out there, considering we had arrived at around 5 p.m. After a couple of hours of walking on this trail, we run into a couple who had set up a small little campsite. They were on the lower end of the mountain. We introduced ourselves, and they even offered us some food. They were pretty nice for the most part. After that, we continue our way up into the mountain. After all, we wanted a place for ourselves. Up about 2 miles away from the young couple, we reach an area that overlooks the entire park and the lake where we had started from. We did notice a group of campers up ahead of us, but other than them, we were the only ones up there at the time. We found a place in between some trees. It would offer us perfect cover from the winds in the sky. By now, it's around 7 p.m., and those who were out there in the daytime walking around had already left, or were in the process of leaving the park. It had started to get cold. It was now about 50 degrees, so we sat in the tent and got a little campfire going. We had some hot chocolate with a nice warm meal, and now we're enjoying the view. Because of the tarp we had over us, it did make it difficult to see around us. We could only see the view of the lake. We had now noticed that group we had some food with had already left. We saw them pack up their things and leave. Eventually, me and Brian call it a night, and we go to sleep. About 2 hours later, I'm awakened by what I thought was the wind. The wind had started to pick up before we fell asleep, so I thought that's what I was hearing. I sat there listening for another 5 minutes, but now I realized it wasn't the wind. Perhaps I'd been hearing a squirrel or, even worse, a curious bear walking around. I woke Brian up since I wanted to make sure I wasn't hearing these things. In his grumpy mood, he listens and he confirms what I was hearing. There was definitely movement all around us. We sat there quietly in anticipation, hoping it was just a curious animal about to leave. I grabbed the axe we had used to collect firewood, and I held it close. With the light from the moon, we were able to see a shadow of somebody walking around our tent. It was so bright out there, we really didn't even need a lantern to see. We waited there for what seemed like hours, really only about a few minutes. Then, somebody puts their hand on the tent. They stand there for about 15 seconds. Me and my brother are ready to jump out at any moment. Then, just like that, we hear footsteps walking away. It didn't sound like one person. It sounded like a large group. That was it. No more sounds. The next morning, we got up at around 6 a.m. and we take a look outside. There were no signs of the other campers we had seen, but what we found sent us some chills. Tracks all around our tent and campsite. We packed everything up and we made our way down the mountain. We never did get an answer to who it was and what they wanted, and I think that's what makes it worse. Number 3. This happened to me and my sister about 10 years ago. We were in our 20s and quite the couple of college kids. Though we did have a big test to study for, we ended up going camping over the weekend, instead of studying like everybody else. We should have stayed doing that looking back on it now. We somehow managed to fit all our camping supplies in our small car, and so we make the 2-hour drive to a set of woods that was pretty much in the middle of nowhere. It was a place where a lot of people would go to, and honestly, we were expecting not to be the only ones out there. That would be the complete opposite. We only saw one car in the parking lot, and it looked to be an old abandoned van. Great. That already wasn't looking good. We take our chances anyways. Now it's about 7 p.m., so the night was slowly approaching us. We unpacked our things and walked about a quarter mile into the woods. While setting up our camp, my sister tells me she heard walking around us. I guess I was so focused on setting this place up, I hadn't really noticed it. We weren't going to take our chances, so instead we left and went down to the complete opposite side of the woods. See, there was another entrance and a parking area. It's just that it was about 5 miles away. This time when we arrived, we noticed there were no cars. We looked for a spot, and once we're satisfied, we sat down and we started our little campfire. Eventually, after some time and after some food, we eventually ended up falling asleep. I stayed up a little bit longer, and my sister Kimberly fell asleep first. I was laying down, it's just that I hadn't fallen asleep completely. Suddenly, I start hearing footsteps around us. Instantly, I was wide awake. I tried waking up my sister, but she's a heavy sleeper. Waking her up wasn't going to be an easy thing. In the strangest voice I ever heard, I hear somebody say to us, "I'm here for you. Why don't you come outside and play with me?" While he said that, he seemed to be running around and laughing of all things. I had enough. I yell out to my sister and I tell her to get the axe. That was enough to wake her up strangely, and now I hear this guy running out into the woods. By the time we got out of the tent, he was long gone. With that, it was settled. We were leaving now. Instead of taking the tent apart, we just take what we could carry and we make our way back to the car. Here's the thing. When we arrived, something was completely different. One of our rearview mirrors was broken, and we even saw a large rock on the ground. I'm guessing that person we had seen earlier was responsible for it. We drove to a park ranger station to report the incident, and he ended up going with us into town. He told us that they had actually been looking for somebody out there because they had been causing trouble for other campers. They posted a notice on their website, but I guess we never did read about it. I didn't find any more information, so if anybody was in the Georgia wilderness about 2 months ago and you experienced something similar, it would be great to hear from you. Number 4. This all began when me and my wife had taken a trip to Utah. Along with the normal things you would expect to go around to see, we wanted to go and do some backpacking in the wilderness. We're from Australia, so we've done plenty of camping before. We just wanted to try it somewhere else. After what happened, I think I'll go ahead and avoid camping or backpacking for a while. It was a cooler day than normal when we left our motel, and we make an hour drive into the wilderness. We arrived at a mountain area where we would spend the next couple of hours just going up and checking everything out. It did take us some time, but eventually we make the climb and we can see the ocean from where we were. It was amazing. We put all our things down and now we started setting up our camp. By the time we had started dinner, most of the people walking around in the daytime had left. We only noticed one other couple while out there, and honestly, we thought we were the only ones left. We would soon later find that out the hard way. Out of almost seemingly nowhere, a man appeared wearing a large coat. By this point, me and my wife had already started our campfire. I looked back at my wife as I stared at the man, hoping to see the brave look on her face. But when I turned around to look at her, she had the same concerned, worried face as me. The feelings were the same. The man now starts walking closer to us, and then he says, "This is a nice area to see the view, isn't it? Be a shame if somebody fell off the mountain. Hey, did you hear about that couple that went missing last year?" You would think he would have started with a friendly hello or a sorry to intrude on your campsite, but no, he chooses to mention something like that. I tried not to act too surprised, and I responded with a quick response. "Wow, that's really a shame, isn't it? I'm just glad it wasn't us." While saying so, I was keeping an eye on him just to make sure he wasn't hiding anything. He mentioned that we should be careful out here because it would start raining soon. I found that weird considering that there were really no clouds in the sky. He kept looking towards the cliff and he finally said, "Well, that's enough out of me. I'm going down to the lake now." He then proceeds to walk away and leave us alone. By now, me and my wife are more confused than anything. By now, the sun had almost completely disappeared, so if he did walk down to the lake we had seen earlier, it would have been dark. My wife didn't want to stay any longer, and even I was thinking the same thing. I told her not to worry about it and instead focus on relaxing and enjoying our time out here. That wouldn't even last that long, because about 3 minutes later, somebody else appears and goes off walking the same way the first person had walked to. The thing is, none of them appear to have any sort of backpacks or any supplies you would expect while backpacking and camping. We were now wondering what our next course of action was. We could always go on over to the other couple we had seen earlier, so at least we weren't on our own. Well, that's what we ended up doing. We walked about 20 minutes down the mountain and we found them playing with some cards. They were surprised to see us, but when we told them about what happened, they seemed more understanding. "If it makes you feel any better, you're more than welcome to stay here next to us," the young man had told us. It was a nice offer, and we take it. "Do you need an axe? Here, take this one. We always have one next to us just in case." Honestly, we should have just left, but we didn't travel all this way for nothing. We weren't going to let this random stranger ruin it for us. No way that was going to happen. Inside our tent, me and my wife were listening to a baseball game, and once it was over, we changed the channel. We started listening to a show where the radio host talked about people that had gone missing. That surprised us right away. Guess what happened that night? It had started to rain. I guess Stranger Man can predict the weather now. How convenient. By the following morning, the rain had finally stopped. We made it down the mountain with the couple just fine. It's just that it wasn't without noticing the muddy tracks around us. They were leading around our campsite and even going back to the original spot we had been at. Looking back on it, it remains unexplained to us, and we still have no idea what could have happened had we stayed any longer. Number 5. I'm currently 17 years old, and this happened in late September. One day after school, myself and my friends decided that we wanted to go to a cabin that my family owned in the mountains. It had rained the past week, and today it had finally let up. Since we didn't want to wait any longer, we decided to make the drive up there. Before doing so, we went over to my uncle's house to pick up some tents and firewood, since he worked as a park ranger and he had plenty of supplies for us to use. After we spend a couple of hours on the freeway, we take an exit into a small town. We stop at a convenience store to buy some food for the night. After paying for our goodies and driving another half hour, we arrive at the cabin. It's now about 5 in the afternoon. Even though I'd spent so many summer months up there in the cabins, this would be the first time I take my friends backpacking out there. I told my friends that besides this cabin, there was another cabin about 2 miles away from us, but other than that, we're pretty much in the middle of nowhere. I never did see any cars or sign of people out there, so it seemed like we had the entire spot for ourselves. We stayed up until about 2 in the morning, watching movies and playing some games, and finally we all fell asleep at around 3 in the morning. I remember waking up no more than an hour later. I can hear my friend Kylie walking around. Kylie was my friend's little sister. "Hey Kylie, you couldn't sleep, could you?" "It's not that. It's just for the past hour, I've been hearing footsteps outside the cabin and whispers." I reassured her that things were fine. I told her that she was just imagining sounds from the movies we had watched earlier. I'd tell her to go back to sleep and say I'll keep a lookout for her. I'll be honest, I was really tired at this point, but I felt bad. While she was sleeping, I could start hearing the sound of walking, only that it wasn't from the inside, it was from outside. I froze and listened to the sounds, and I saw one of the automatic lights outside turn on. Now I knew without a doubt somebody was walking around our cabin. Of course, my number one priority was to keep my friend safe, so I wake up my oldest friend and I explain to her what's going on. I tell her to keep a lookout for Kylie, and in the meantime, I'll call the man that lives in the cabin nearby. He was an officer that worked in the nearby town, so I'm sure he can help us. As I'm on the phone, I keep hearing whispering outside, and now it sounds like the door handle in the back is being moved. Whoever it was trying to find a way inside, no matter which way it was. In what seemed like record time, our cabin is filled with the headlights of a car, and now I notice it's our neighbor, Andrew. We hear him yelling at whoever was out there, and we see him chase somebody away from our cabin. It was at this time that we get the courage to step outside. Andrew tells us that this wasn't the first time it happened. He ended up telling us that we called him at the perfect time. Turns out that he's been looking for this man, and somebody had actually gotten inside his cabin while he was away. Unfortunately for Andrew, he lost his new laptop. As me and Andrew looked around, we found a crowbar lying by the back door. I'm guessing in all the commotion, the person trying to get inside must have dropped it. I guess that could explain why I kept hearing the door trying to open, and somebody trying to use some sort of tool. A couple of weeks ago, after we had tried to forget about it, we get a call from Andrew. He says that he still hasn't been found yet. I'm guessing he just hasn't been back since. Number 6. A year ago during the beginning of June, my cousin Peter and I decided to go backpacking in a nearby bird sanctuary. This place was neat. It was one of the benefits of living in the town I lived in. It was within walking distance of our town, so me and Peter decided to make an afternoon out of it. On our way there, we would pass some large fields and even some lakes too. This part of the nearby valley gave you a great overlook of my town. For the most part, my walks out there were pretty uneventful and quiet. It was rare to see people out there, as it really wasn't as popular, but when you did see people, they were pretty friendly. Since this was a town where everybody pretty much knew each other, you knew most of the people out there. Anyway, since it was 6 in the afternoon, we wanted to get there at sunset, so we would be able to take some pictures. We only had about an hour left before it got completely dark out there, so we were in a hurry. We make our way up some winding trails and get to the crossroads in the path that either take you down to the valley or upward toward the bird sanctuary. From where we were standing, we couldn't really see what was ahead of us. Things were about to get weird. As we make our way up there, we see a man who looks to be in his mid-30s. He's running around in circles and screaming at random things into the sky. That was strange, and to make things even more weird, he was wearing a heavy coat. Mind you, it was easily in the upper 80s. Maybe he was trying to work out or train for something, but we still found it out of place. It was either that or maybe he just partied a little too much. Regardless, we wouldn't be staying around to talk to him. As we continue along, we reach the lake area. We notice what look to be food wrappers and empty soda cans, so I'm guessing this might belong to our screaming friend below us. As we enter the last stretch of the path before our destination, we had to walk through half a mile of woods. I guess calling it woods was a little more of an exaggeration. It was more like just this trail with trees all around you, not so much woods, but that's what we called it anyways. We were walking on the trail and noticed another man stumbling around through the trees next to us. By the clothing he was wearing, it looked like he had been living out here. He looked to be talking to himself, which at first we thought perhaps he might have been talking to us. When we called out to him, thinking he had said something to us, he just stares at us with mean eyes. By the look on his face, I instantly felt like continuing on was a bad idea. Still, we continued on and made it to our spot just in time to see the sunset. By now, we were so amazed by the view up there. We had put the 2 encounters we had earlier behind us. We sat down for about half an hour, eating and enjoying the sandwiches that we'd bought at the little store earlier. After some random pictures and one final goodbye to our spot, we start making the way back. We were of course on alert due to what happened earlier, and as a side note, we hadn't seen anybody else beside those 2. We did see some staff that worked up there, but they just stopped by to say hello before closing up the park. We now make our way through the woods cautiously. While walking through the woods, my cousin Peter said that he saw some movement in the trees. I just told him it was most likely an owl or maybe some other bird. He was being serious apparently, because he told me to take a look into the trees. So to satisfy his curiosity, I look, and we both start seeing movement. Then we see what looks to be somebody looking at us from the tree above. Suddenly, the runner from earlier jumps out of the tree and starts walking up to us slowly. We didn't take our chances. When making our way out of there, we now notice the second man from earlier in the woods. He was now standing between us and the exit, and Runner Man was catching up to us. In one quick movement, me and Peter both jump to the side to avoid him, and then rejoin each other on the trail and continue our run down to the lake. We notice a couple who was walking their dog, and we go running up to them. To that couple, sorry for surprising you like that. As soon as we turn around, we no longer see the two that had been following us back there. We explain to them what we had experienced, but they don't believe us. Apparently, they weren't going to believe a couple of 14-year-olds. We head back into town and we try to forget about it. The next morning, I ended up calling the staff of the bird sanctuary because I wanted to see if they had any late-night visitors. I'm referring to the two from last night. They tell me they had to chase two people out and call officers in town to escort them out because they had tried to get inside while closing. They are probably just some random people that stay out there, but it definitely stopped us from going there anymore. Number 7. To start my story off, I want to say that I love backpacking. I love going exploring, and oftentimes at not, I make it my goal to do so at least once a month. I've gone out so much, I've pretty much memorized all the surrounding areas I've been to. Like you can imagine, being out there in the woods and nature, you see a lot of interesting things, and I've had my fair share of stories and experiences, but this one time it was different. I'd grown tired of going to the same places I'd gone to, so one day I decided to get in my car and go on a road trip. I'd planned to visit national parks and visit places and towns I'd only dreamed about visiting. I worked as a writer for a small newspaper in my town, and I thought a great way to document my adventures would be to visit these places and write about them. I had started from Seattle and had planned to go to Philadelphia to visit a friend of mine who lived there. Of course, I would make some stops along the way. I make a detour and decided to go to Michigan. I've always heard about the lakes up there, and I decided to stop in a small little town. After spending the night in a small little motel, I go to the lobby and talk to the person working at the front desk. Hello, good morning. I was wondering, are there any good areas out here that are good for backpacking and exploring? I explain what I've been doing, and she tells me about some nearby mountains that offer a gorgeous view of the Great Lakes. I thought it would be perfect. I thanked her and drive down this lonely little winding road until I reach a small little parking area. I grab my backpack and water, and I make my walk over to a bulletin board. It showed a map of the area. After reading it and taking some pictures, I start my adventure. As I start making my way up into the trails, I notice I still hadn't seen anybody out there yet. My best guess was that this area wasn't really popular. After a couple of hours of walking, I made it to a large, beautiful lake. I looked around and found a nice little area by some trees. It could actually act as a natural little camp. And so, with the tarp I had in my backpack, I set my things down and start preparing a little campfire as well. I figured since I was already out here, why not spend the night and enjoy this place? I'd actually brought some supplies with me, so I thought staying one night wouldn't be too bad. When I went over to the lake to get some water to boil, I noticed something I hadn't noticed earlier. There was an empty tent not too far away down the path. I guess from where I'd been standing and setting my things up, I hadn't noticed anything. I thought perhaps somebody else might be out here. Well, at least I wasn't going to be alone. Still, at that point, I'd been out there for about 2 hours, and I hadn't seen anybody return. By now, it was starting to get dark, and since there is nothing else to do, I go back and start preparing some food. I'd brought my laptop with me. I decided I'd use the time to start writing up on some of the stories I'd experienced thus far. I lose track of time as I'm writing, and now it's been about another 2 hours. By now, it was about 9 p.m., and I still haven't seen anybody return to the campsite. I started to get a little bit worried, and even almost considered leaving, but I told myself that I was just overreacting about it. After some hot chocolate and finishing up my last few paragraphs, I decided to call it a night. I'll tell you, when I sleep, it's almost impossible to wake me up. It was nice because we had neighbors growing up who were always loud. Meanwhile, my brothers found it hard to sleep. I slept like a baby. With that said, this was the first time I'd waken up to anything. Maybe it was because I was more alert of being alone out here by myself, and it being quiet. But I started hearing the sound of somebody walking around. Perhaps it was the person returning to their tent? I wasn't sure, but thankfully, since it was dark, it was hard to tell where I was. Finally, after what seemed like ages, the footsteps had stopped. I waited there nervously for about 10 minutes. Then I looked outside, but I saw no one. Again, I was considering leaving, but I was so tired I thought I would take my chances. When I woke up in the morning, it was now close to 7. Thankfully, nothing had happened to me, at least what I knew of. When I looked around, I noticed something was missing. The food I had with me. I had left my food in a separate area away from my tent, just in case a curious animal showed up. I guess in my confusion, I thought I'd heard the sound of a person's footsteps. When I looked closer at the tracks outside, they weren't of a person. They appeared to belong to a bear. How in the world the bear hadn't noticed me, I had no idea. But I'm guessing it was more interested in the food I'd left outside. That experience was definitely enough to give me a friendly reminder. Always be aware of your surroundings. Soon I returned to my car and make my way back to the motel. I didn't stop at another park after that, and I do make it to Philadelphia all right. I still enjoy backpacking. I'm just more careful now. Number 8. This happened to me last semester, but honestly, it feels like it just happened a couple of hours ago. I'm currently in college, attending the University of Pennsylvania. I was taking a rock climbing course for one of my electives. Toward the end of the semester, one of the requirements was to write a paper about what we enjoyed most about the course, and even how we applied the skills we had learned. I wanted to add my own little experience to it, so I thought as a part of my assignment, I would go rock climbing and backpacking. Then I could write about my experience. Honestly, I really wanted to do it for a while, so it gave me an excuse to spend a weekend doing so. I didn't have a car with me, so one of my roommates dropped me off at a nearby camping ground, and from there, I told her she could pick me up in 2 days. I told her to meet me at the park ranger station, and so the plan was set. I went and talked to the park ranger, and I told him about what I was doing. He wished me luck, and said to be careful, and so I was off. It was amazing. I was loving every single moment of this. I was always a brave kid growing up, so I didn't mind spending my time out there. Soon enough, it had started to get dark, and so I stopped to take a break. Thankfully, I had some matches with me, so with some firewood, I was able to make a small little fire. Of course, walking around for so long, I needed to find some water. I had a water bottle with me, and so I would look for a stream where I can fill it up. I would make sure to boil the water in a small little canister. I found a small little stream up ahead of me, about 5 minutes from where I was staying, and so I go to fill up the water bottle and return to prepare the water. As you can imagine, it really didn't taste that great, but I knew it was safe. All in all, everything went great that night. I couldn't wait to go back home and write all about this. I could even include the photos I had taken. When I woke up in the morning, my rock climbing experience would begin. I spent the day walking and climbing around, and after a few stops here and there and getting some pictures, it was time to go back. I was still quite a ways from the campgrounds, but as I'm making my way back over there, I saw a vehicle I hadn't seen before. I realized right away that this wasn't somebody that worked there. He saw me and drove close and then says, "So, are you out here on your own or something?" I told him I was with my family, and they were just a short ways behind the trees. He seemed to get the idea, and he drove off. I was overcome with this nervous feeling. He wasn't a park ranger because he didn't even have the uniform or anything like that. I thought he had left, but now I noticed he was returning. I knew I had to get away, so I tried to hide behind some rocks. After hiding for what seemed like forever, he once again drives away. Finally, I make it back to the campground, and I tell the park ranger about what happened. "That's strange. Only we're allowed to have vehicles out there. Are you sure it wasn't a park ranger?" "I'm pretty sure it wasn't. No person I know acts that way. At least not a normal person." One of the other workers there interrupts him, and he tells him somebody had just called to complain about the same thing. They take it very seriously, and so a team was sent out there to try and find whoever was out there. I didn't find out what happened next, because I'd called my roommate to pick me up. As soon as she arrived, we left. As for the paper I wrote for my rock climbing course, well, I got an A+, even some extra credit for actually going out backpacking. I think the instructor just felt bad for what happened to me, but still, I'll take the good grade. Number 9. I just turned 20 years old, and I thought as a great way for me and my brother to spend our time together, we had made some plans to go backpacking. See, my brother Sam had gone studying abroad, and I hadn't seen him for almost 5 years. With that said, we always went camping with our father when we were younger, so this would be a great way to catch up. I was sure my brother had plenty of silly stories from his time in university. We planned on going to a state park that was very popular. I talked to Dad, and I wanted to know if he wanted to go with us. "Of course I'll go. What a great time to spend with my two wonderful sons. I'll go ahead and find us a place to camp. You two can bring whatever you want with you." Awesome. Now we didn't have to worry about finding a place to stay since Dad would take care of that part. Our dad ended up finding a spot that overlooks the park. Dad was great at finding spots, so of course me and Sam were super happy about it. After grabbing some food for us to have later that night, we drive on over and arrive around 1 p.m. After we set everything up, we go ahead and spend the time with Dad, walking around and catching up with Sam. Soon enough, we are getting hungry, so it's time to head back to make some well-deserved dinner. I think I had way too many s'mores, because I didn't have enough room for the food we had brought. Luckily for me, it was just a cup of noodles. Thankfully, I wouldn't have to worry about that going bad. Yes, we're a simple family. We love ramen. After we shared some stories, we heard the sound of a car engine. Weird, I thought, but that was soon followed by a van going around our campsite. The nerve of this driver. Seriously. He rolls down the window and he explains this area was his and that we were in the way. So let me get this right. An area where anybody can stay has a reservation list? While you're at it, you might as well put us on the list of leave us alone. Besides, my dad was here pretty much the entire day. Now he shows up and tells us this information? He didn't look too happy with our response, and he ends up leaving. Good, he has the right idea. He knows that we're not going to let go of our spot. Eventually, as we grew tired, we went to sleep. A few hours later, we woke up to the sound of other campers crying for some reason. I was on high alert when I heard this. I thought it was the guy from earlier up to something, but instead, it was two girls who looked to be in their early 20s, around my age. "Hey, what's wrong? Did something happen to the two of you?" They told us that during the nighttime, they kept hearing sounds, and even the sound of a car engine. They described seeing a man in a darkened van driving around the entire night and teasing them. I guess he had left them alone when they started running away. But by that point, the girls were too worried about staying around. I'm guessing that's how they found us. We tell them that we'll walk back to the parking area together, and so after taking everything down, we head on over. As we're making our way back to the parking area, we see red and blue lights and start hearing sirens. That's followed by the sounds of a helicopter above us. One of the officers stops and tells us that we needed to leave the park now. We didn't hesitate, and we take the opportunity to run out of there. I later found out that it involved the man from earlier. I wasn't sure what he had planned to do. It seemed like he was just toying with us. I'm guessing it was enough to send a search party after him. Number 10. My girlfriend and I decided to do some backpacking before we had to return to work. Our schedules ended up working out in that we were able to take the same amount of time off. We live in Australia, and so after a week of adventures in town, we would end the week with backpacking in the outback. We went out into an area that was essentially in the middle of nowhere. I say middle of nowhere since there's really not much outside of town. It was more like a large park. It's just that it's away from civilization. Me and my girlfriend Abby are avid bird watchers, and we love taking pictures. We actually have our own little setup at home. We take care of many different types of birds. Since we had arrived later in the evening, our plan was to try and get some photos of some owls. We went to this little area that had a small little waterfall. You could take a path up to it. It might have been empty at the time, but during the busy months, it all changes. So you could follow two ways to get to the top. You could take the way that takes you directly to the top, or you could take this winding little path that actually goes up in the middle of the waterfall. You can imagine that's the more popular route to take. So we started to make our way up there. As we're walking, we hear the loudest and strangest yell we've ever heard in our life. Honestly, it didn't even sound like a noise a person would make. I'm usually pretty brave, and it takes a lot more to get to me. But because it was dark and we hadn't seen anybody else out there, that bravery melted away faster than ice cream on a warm, sunny afternoon. There were no street lamps or any sort of light out there. All we had with us were the lights from our cameras and our phones. Immediately, we decided it would be a better idea just to leave. The next morning, while meeting up with my friend for some coffee, I'd mentioned what had happened the previous night, and as I finished explaining the noise, I'd heard one of the baristas, who I'm guessing had overheard our conversation, interrupt me and mention something similar happened to her. The thing is, when she went out there, not only did she hear the yelling, or what she thought was yelling, when she had returned to her car, she found that two of her tires had been slashed. She was able to make it back to town, but she has a strange feeling that whoever was out there must have been responsible for it. Me and my friend returned a few times after that, with a larger group of course, but nothing happened any of those times. Also, nobody in town has said anything like that had happened to them, which we did find strange. Bonus story. Though this isn't a backpacking story, it still involves my time living near some woods. I live in an area that had little small town houses, and right next to it were miles and miles of woods. On occasion, we would get coyotes and deer that would walk around, but for the most part, it wasn't anything too serious. I'm here because I want to know if somebody might have an explanation for what I experienced. That, or maybe somebody had a similar thing happen to them. On a Friday night, after arriving back from town, I settled in to watch some TV. I had gone with my brother Roger to get some pizza at a small little shop, so by the time I got home, I was pretty tired. My neighbor Ryan and I have this tradition of making popcorn and listening to the radio on Friday night, and though I was tired, I had some room for some snacks. It was about 9 p.m. at this point, so obviously it was dark. We sat on the bench on my front porch, listening to the radio and watching the woods in front of us. It was a cooler night than usual, but it was something we really didn't mind too much. Just as a side note, there aren't any street lamps by the trees. The only light that reached it were the street lamps by our homes, but even with those, you could still barely see anything out there. As we sat there, Ryan turns the radio down and he tells me to be quiet. Do you hear that? What, the radio? You just turned it down. Of course I'm not going to be hearing it. Aren't you funny? No, not the radio. That. The best way to describe it was it sounded like somebody laughing. Mind you, it's like 30 degrees out here, so unless you're laughing because of how cold it was, I sure don't expect you to be out in the woods on your own like that. Instantly, me and Ryan are running back inside my house. I guess in watching way too many movies, we might have overreacted, but it was still something we thought about. We were almost certain it was nobody from the other houses. We had a perfect view of all of them, and nobody stepped outside once. The noise was from the woods, not the houses, and when we talked to the neighbors last night, they had heard the noise as well. I'm not exactly sure what it was, but I thought I would tell you all about it anyways. Hello there, and thank you so much for watching today's video. I hope you enjoyed today's stories, because they were quite the adventures. Which one was your favorite? Personally, number 7 was my favorite. So that might be the end of today's adventures, but don't worry, I'll be back next time. Until then, take care.